Hello again, YouTube. How's it going? I'm back, finally back with another video, and once again, it's Identity 5. I feel like this channel is supposed to be a general gaming channel, but since I recently got into IDV, I've been really felt like a creative spark going to my brain, and I've been really liking doing IDV content. So, um, without further ado, though, I don't want to take too long because I feel like this is gonna be kind of a long, another rambly video. But I wanted to discuss, as someone who is coming from Dead by Daylight, a game that's very similar to Identity 5, I wanted to compare and contrast the two, especially now that I've played Identity 5 for about a month now. And it's been a very interesting month. So, obviously, disclaimer, I'm still very new to Identity 5, of course, and I'm still learning every time I get on to play. So, and compared to Dead by Daylight, which I've been playing since like late 2022, 2023. So, yeah, and these are also my personal opinions. You may disagree or agree, but yeah. And of course, I want to do this in like AMR format. I don't know if that's relaxing or not, but this is an ASMR channel, and I don't really have another channel to put it on. So yeah. But first, one of the biggest things about between DVD and IDV, and yes, I will be saying IDV more than ID5, is that bots. Bots are interesting because in Dead by Daylight, technically there are no bot matches, because in Dead by Daylight there are no bot matches unless you go into custom games. I've done it before to practice like killer techniques and stuff. But in Identity 5, you can get bot matches, even if you're just playing just normal quick play. And it can be a bit of a time waster for me because sometimes I'm like, okay, I'll do one more match before I go to bed or something, but it's a bot match and I don't really want to end on the bot match. And they're fairly obvious to, once you play more, they're fairly obvious to figure out if you're in a bot match or not, just in the lobby alone. Sometimes even when you start loading in and you can see everyone's profiles and stuff, but it's more obvious in the lobby. So it seems like it's more common though when you're first starting to play the game, which makes sense. And this is very similar to NetEase. NetEase is the developers of Identity 5, and NetEase does spot matches in Marvel Rifles, which is another big game that they've developed recently, and a lot of people don't like it. I'm pretty tolerant of it, but it can get a bit tiring, especially when I play a normal match with other people. Okay. So next, Survivor gameplay. Survivor gameplay is really unique in Identity 5. Every survivor has unique abilities and traits, with survivors being placed into 4 categories: decode, rescue, contain, and assist. So for instance, decode survivors excel at decoding ciphers, which are the equivalent of gens in DVD. Rescue survivors are great at saving other survivors from rocket chairs, which are basically hooks in Dead by Daylight. Contained survivors excel at escaping and wasting the hunters, aka the killer's time. They're also known as kiters, and kiting basically means looping. So kiters, loopers, you know that. And then let's see. Alright, assist survivors help the team in various ways, like helping survivors escape or giving them buffs. So, for example, my 2 mains are journalist and cheerleader. Journalist is a rescue type survivor who uses her camera to conjure an illusion of a young boy. And if you don't know who the young boy is, it's basically her childhood best friend. There's a lot to unpack there, and maybe one day I'll do a lore video, because Alice's lore and her little childhood friend's lore is so compact and complex. It'd be really interesting to do like a theory video. But anyways, yeah, she has a camera that can help her kite against the hunter. Her little friend will camp pallets basically and pull them down if needed. Or he can body block her, which is really good, especially against hunters like wax artists, who has, well, if you know, you know. And also, as part of her kit, her little buddy, Orphe, I like to call him because his full name is Orpheus. Orphe can also help save survivors from the rocket cheers. He can only do it once per match, and not at all if you use up your camera for kiting. So you have to be aware of that. I only learned that the hard way, just the other day. Yes, like I said, I'm still learning. On the other hand, Cheerleader, aka Lily, so Cheerleader could provide speed boosts to her teammates and reduce cooldowns for abilities, for survivor abilities and her own abilities. So she really is the cheerleader of the group. She's there to support. She's really fun to play. I'm still pretty bad at her. I'm still pretty bad at journalists too, but they both are really, really fun to play. But in Dead by Daylight, all survivors are just purely cosmetic, which is not necessarily a bad thing if you are the type of person who likes the freedom of playing different survivors. Since you can pick and choose your perks as you please. But personally, I've actually enjoyed the survivor gameplay more in Identity 5 lately, but that could also be because I'm still probably in the honeymoon period, and I've played Dead by Daylight for over like 2 years at this point. Item number 3. There's more diversity in Dead by Daylight. So Dead by Daylight, for instance, just added their very first trans survivor to an already pretty diverse cast of characters. I think Identity 5 will most likely forever lack in survivors like that, since it's developed by a Chinese company, which of course means there's always going to be heavy censorship. Like, for instance, Identity 5 was even supposed to be very, very, very similar to Dead by Daylight, because in the beta, I've seen beta images where they did use hooks instead of chairs, and the survivors did kind of have like screams, but it kind of got dumbed down to be a bit like, I guess, kid friendly. But Identity 5 does have diversity in its own other ways. For instance, there's a blind survivor called the Mind's Eye, and it's really interesting because I've played it quite a few times, and because she's blind, you can't see the screen at all. No. That would be really bad. But actually the color there's like no color. It's like black and white. It's still easy to see, but it's a very unique kind of gameplay that I like. There's also a hunter named Galatea, and she has dwarfism, and she is confined to a wheelchair due to hemiplegia. I think that's basically like, I had to look that up. But if you didn't know, hemiplegia is just paralysis of the muscles usually like lower face, arm, leg and it's on one side of the body. And I thought that was interesting, and it somehow works because I think it's just really So it kind of depends on what you're looking for. Unfortunately, there's like not like that many like people of color in Identity 5. Um, so that kind of does suck, but there's still like it's still there, but yeah, that's something that could be improved, but it probably most likely won't, because again, uh, yeah. But who knows? We'll see. Um, so next item, number 4, competitive gameplay. So I'm not gonna lie, I was really shocked to discover that not only does IDV have a ranked match system in place, but they also have esports, with dedicated players competing against each other in tournaments for in-game and cash prizes. And when I first started playing, actually, I think the whole big tournament, I think it's called KOA, which is short for Call of the Abyss. That's like I think the whole big tournament thing, and history was made this year actually at the tournament because the first ever Japanese team won. Against usually it's I think just Chinese teams, because the thing about Identity 5 is it's very like small in the rest, like in the US, Europe, etc. But in Asia, it's huge. Like in China and Japan, it's really big. But more on that later. So I so it's really interesting because as I say that, DVD, despite a lot of players wishing there's a dedicated and behavior the developers of DVD backed competitive sports scene, there's no such thing. There are comp DVD players, but there's nothing really official. I think these comp players have done like little tournaments before, but I think it's like more self-sponsored thing, and there's no like, again, behavior doesn't do anything with making like a dedicated rank mode in Dead by Daylight. I think a lot of players would really enjoy that, and it kind of sucks that they don't have something like that. And even Identity 5 brings like esports skins to the game. I literally got one recently for Lily, for the cheerleader, and because I adore it, and it reminds me of K-pop a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, like K-pop fits that I see. So hopefully my girl Alice might see some love. But yeah, it's really interesting. But also, what's neat about IDV Ranked is that you can actually see who the top character is. Like in like for instance, you can see who the top journalist or cheerleader or sculptor is on the character leaderboard. You can see this with the server, and you can see this amongst your friends as well. And there's also another ranked game mode, 5v5, where you play with friends against another group to compete to see who's the better team. Basically to see whose hunter does the best overall in eliminating survivors. It's really neat, and it's wild. Even though Behavior did back up IDV when it was developed, that they can't follow in IDV's footsteps or NetEase's footsteps in creating a dedicated rank mode for Dead by Daylight. But I think it's because they want Dead by Daylight to be a more casual gameplay kind of deal. So next item, 5. I swear I'm gonna try to be a bit faster. I don't want this video to be too long. But survivors versus killers. So I've noticed, and I think this is only my personal experience, but Dead by Daylight always has this debate on if the game is killer-sided or survivor-sided, and it never ends and never will. IDV, however, well, the meta does shift, but I've yet to see players and constant heated debate over survivors versus hunters. I feel it's about on equal footing. Yes, there are some survivors that counter hunters and vice versa, but usually I don't hear like, oh, this survivor is so OP, or this hunter is really too much and they should be nerfed to the ground. Actually, I think every time speaking of ranked, in ranked you can actually, they have bans, And the hunters can ban certain survivors, and certain survivors can ban hunters. And every time I see Hullabaloo, and Goatman be banned. And so, I'm not gonna lie, I've been against both, and I can see why they are banned, especially Hullabaloo. Goatman, I think it's just a bit annoying. But I feel like Hullabaloo is actually a bit better, and apparently he got nerfs, so he's not too bad. But yeah, like, I guess it depends. Like I said, I've only been playing this IDV for a month, so maybe I'm missing out on Survivor versus Hunter arguments, like Survivor sided, but versus Hunter arguments, because I have now lately seen people talk about Survivor sided maps and stuff, but it's usually like one or two certain maps. But yeah, anyways, moving on. So, normal gameplay. Now, this is big because if you're coming from Dead by Daylight and trying to play Identity 5, you may not like the gameplay at all, even though the gameplay is very similar. The biggest difference is if you think you've seen camping and tunneling in Dead by Daylight, you have not played Identity 5. The toxic gameplay that people will label, the gameplay that people will label as toxic in Dead by Daylight is the normal gameplay loop in Identity 5. So if you hate being camped and tunneled, Identity 5 is not for you. I really want to emphasize that. Identity 5 is not for you if you don't like being camped or tunneled, because most of the time that's the case. I've only played a handful of matches where specifically in 1v4, where the hunter doesn't camp. And the only time that's not really the case is in 2v8, aka duo hunters. And even then, it will happen sometimes. Like, literally, I was playing Identity 5 earlier on, and that's literally what happened to me in a 2v8 match, where this fool's gold, who's my arch nemesis, by the way, camped. I was first to go down, and I got chaired first, or I was one of the first, I don't know. And I probably have the clip because I was actually doing this on stream. By the way, please check me out on Twitch at Sunday night. But anyways, he basically camped me each chair and tunneled me, and I didn't really get to play the game. Again, that happens. You don't get mad, you just move on. And that was in 2v8 too, which, like I said, is not always the case, but sometimes the case. But in all fairness to hunters, in Identity 5, ciphers, aka gens, go by really fast. They can go by really fast, especially if you have an efficient team. Because as far as I can tell, I'm really bad because I probably should have looked at the hunters a bit more, like the perks and stuff, or whatever they're called. But hunters don't really have cipher slowdown perks, like how I think there's like technically one where I think they can take away cipher progress, but that's about it. And I never see hunters bring it, so it must be kind of bad. I don't know. So anyways, that's why hunters really have to put pressure really early on. So despite that, the game is still really thriving, because even though it's annoying to deal with, especially against a hunter you hate, I don't know, I guess the general gameplay is really fun. I mean, I'm still playing a month after starting, and I remember before when I played DVD of getting annoyed when I got tunneled or camped, which is not really a thing anymore thanks to the anti-camp meter, but it can suck. But I think I've just grown kind of blasé, kind of like chill about it, but it does annoy me sometimes. Of course, I'm human. Next, cosmetics. Okay, cosmetics, 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 cosmetics. I have to say, I really, really, really love the cosmetics in Identity 5 more than Dead by Daylight at this point. Like, recently, Dead by Daylight just dropped their latest Rift, aka like Battle Pass, a couple of weeks ago, I think. So I can't remember, but it's really recent. And while the cosmetics are pretty good, like a lovely flowery theme, and my girl Hattie, who's one of my mains, um, has gotten something really nice for once. Um, it's still like it still doesn't really compare to the so many eye-catching cosmetics in Identity 5 that are in the shop and in the essence. But wait, what does essence mean exactly? So on the other hand, moving on to the next item on the list, Identity 5 has a gotcha system. I know. You can boo, 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 boo all you want, but there's a gotcha system, completely optional, and because it's really just for cosmetics. So there's a whole debate because that I've actually read the other day about people discussing at the Identity 5 subreddit about the abysmal drop rates in the gacha, which is, yeah, it's not that great. But the reason why the cosmetics are so flashy and pretty in the first place, because I want you to spend money on the essences, aka the gacha system. So there, from what I've gathered and what I've seen, there are 3 essences that come out each season, which feature various cosmetics for various characters. The current one, the one that started off this season 3-7, holy, is called Miss Pomegranate. It's a very, very cute skin for the character Little Girl. And yes, there is a 6-year-old girl running around these trials from very bloodthirsty and demented hunters. DBD could never, because it's more gory, more bloody, and they only allow adults, so like 18 and up characters to be included in the game, which makes sense. But that's why I said I always find it really funny that Identity 5 has a little actual little girl. That little girl, by the way, is journalist as a child. So I tried getting into her too, because I was like, it'd be funny to main Alice and Alice. So, anyways, the only thing at the very least, is skins you can buy in the shop, and like I mentioned earlier, I got Lily's shop skin for the esports from the esports team, but you don't necessarily need to spend or even inquire for not getting anything good at the gacha, because sometimes they do give out free skins, which leads me to number 9, collabs. The whole reason I got into Identity 5 in the first place, despite knowing what it was before, was due to the fact they had the Eve collab. And it's a Japanese horror RPG Maker game, one of the OGs, one of the biggest ones. If you know anything about Japanese RPG Maker games. And because I loved that game and saw that they were doing a collab, I was like, yes, let me join and get that Eve skin. And I got the Eve skin for a journalist who I knew nothing about. I only knew a little bit about her thanks to the main story, which I'll get to later. And I was really worried that I wouldn't like journalist's gameplay, because like I said, Survivor gameplay and IDV is unique to each Survivor, but I really enjoyed playing journalist, even though I'm really bad at it. So the Eve collab actually gave out this one skin for free. So I got Eve for free. I didn't pay anything. I just played the game. I think you get the requirements where you had to pay like 25 games, and that was it. If you want the other 2 skins, Mary and Gary, you had to you did have to pay. I can't remember how much they were, but I think you probably had to spend like at least around like $20. But the thing I love about Identity 5 is they constantly have collabs going. So the current collab that's going on at the time I make this video is the line collab, and the skins are really cute. There's two parts to the line collab because this is a Serene one actually. They had this collab before, I think, like a while back, a year or two back, I'm not sure. And they had skins for Entomologist, which is a skin I'm low-key thinking of getting, and Mercenary. And then this time around they have it for Mechanic and Fire Investigator, which will be coming out later this week. And other collabs that they have that I was kind of shocked that they had were Sanrio's, like Cinnamon Roll and Hello Kitty. The Sherlock Holmes collabs, which is, yes, that apparently the actual Conan Doyle estate approved of it, and I just missed it because it was back in like January, February. And I started playing the game like late April-ish, mid-April-ish, and I'm like, oh, I really hope it comes back because I really like this look of the skins. They had Danganronpa 3 times. They had it 3 times because there's like 3 games. Danganronpa, Trigger Happy Havoc, Danganronpa 2, and then Danganronpa V3. They had Death Note, Junji Ito, which is I think is one of their one of their very first collabs, if not the very first. And Dead by Daylight just got the Junji Ito collab back in January of this year. So speaking of, Dead by Daylight doesn't really do collabs often, but when they do, it's alright. I think Dead by Daylight is more restrictive with collabs because of the nature of the game. Because it's, well, it's more gory, scary, and a lot of the times, like, if anything isn't like really fitting of Dead by Daylight, the community tends to complain. So I don't think we will be seeing like Sanrio, like Hello Kitty, and like Cinnamon Roll anytime soon in Dead by Daylight. Although that would be kind of cute. Next, I touched upon this before actually, but 10 the game modes. There's various game modes in Identity 5, like 2v8, which I mentioned before, aka Duo Hunters. That is open daily. Though it does close at certain times. Like I think right now, actually it might be open again. But it's only around for like a couple hours or so, and then it closes because rank is a thing. I don't know exactly why, but they made it that way where if rank is open, then the game modes are closed. If 2v8 is open, then rank is closed. But yeah, so they did it apparently long before DBD did, which DBD currently has 2v8 going on as well. But it's only around for like 2 weeks, and then it's gone for like a few months. There's also Copycat into Identity 5. That's another popular game mode, and it's basically Among Us or Mafia, if you know what Mafia is. There's tarot cards, hide and seek, etc., etc. There's even little mini games to play with the newest affection system that's tied to the main story of the game. And these mini games are linked to like 3 characters. I think I probably will put it on the screen somewhere. But speaking of the main story, number 11, the main story and lore. So, speaking of, I'm really obsessed. I'm actually become pretty obsessed with the lore in ID5. I know in these types of games, people don't really care about the lore. I learned that from Dead by Daylight, and I'm learning that a bit with Identity 5. But I think actually, from what I've seen, the general community kind of does like the lore. At least I've seen people speculate. On YouTube, Twitter, I know Twitter, Reddit, little bit about the lore because it's really interesting. It helps, for instance, that lore comes with birthdays as well. Yes, so Identity 5 does celebrate every character's birthday. And every time there's a birthday, there you receive a letter if you do like the little in-game activities, which is basically just playing the game. But the letters provide little details of the character, their time at the manor, which is basically the games that we're doing in normal matches, and like their fate, because the main story is pretty big. It's huge, and I like it. So, like for instance, when you first open the game, you can choose if you want to play out the main story and the tutorials or skip. I chose not to skip because obviously I was very new. I was completely blind, didn't even realize that there was like a huge overarching story. And I got thrown into the story prologue before basically playing a visual novel. So the journalist I mentioned before, her name is Alice, if you forgot. She's the current protagonist of the main story. Before that, it was her childhood friend, and sort of, but not really, adoptive brother who, if I call him an adoptive brother to Alice, I think a lot of the Alice Orpheus shippers would be in shambles because, a lot of, like, the shippers really have to defend themselves because a lot of people think Alice and Orpheus are just straight up adopted siblings, which they're not really. I believe from the lore, but anyways, so her childhood friend, sort of, but not really, adoptive brother, sorry, Orpheus Alice shippers, who's a recovering alcoholic of a detective who was once a famous novelist but lost all his memories in what is known as the Mana Games, was the other protagonist, the original protagonist. And that's the little boy that I mentioned before that Alice summons through a camera, little Orphe, aka Orpheus, aka the novelist, because he's also a survivor that you can play as in the game. He's also a hunter. Okay, I will include that later. I'll explain later. But the two of them are trying to piece together the truth of the games and the manor's mysterious past 10 years apart. So their stories take place 10 years apart. Orpheus' story takes place like the present day, where Alice takes place 10 years before. And it's been a very, very fascinating experience, but it's also been very confusing. But yeah, so I've been really looking at the lore of the Mana Games. Of the particular Mana Games that Alice and Orpheus was in, and I was really advised that if you do get into Identity 5, to look into the lore, not just of the main story, but of other characters, because they really crafted the whole beautiful universe. It's unlike Dead by Daylight, so I can actually move on, because I don't have any more items on my list, but I want to add extra things. This video is probably gonna be like 40 minutes long. Nobody's gonna watch this far. If you do, thank you. But so like, it's I already forgot what I was gonna say exactly. But the main story lore it's really good. They've done little, not just in games lore stuff, but also outside. They do beautiful little character background stories and trailers, and they've shown a little bit about like the games and how they play out. Because usually it literally is like 4 survivors against 1 hunter. What's really interesting is that I mentioned before that Orpheus has his detective side, so that's him at like 34 years old. But then he's also the novelist, a playable survivor, and that's Detective Orpheus when he's 10 years younger, so 24 years old. And he also has a hunter identity called Nightmare. So it's really interesting because another thing about Identity 5 is that they have it So some survivors have hunter counterparts and vice versa. So for instance, you have Orpheus, who's the novelist, but he's also Nightmare, which is this like freaky bird-looking character, humanoid character. That reminds me a lot of The Raven, weirdly enough. The Edgar Allan Poe poem. Like I said, I might do a whole video dedicated to theorizing and lore and stuff about the two main characters. But then there's also the Hunt Identity Switch is Fool's Gold. I mentioned him a bit earlier in the video, but he's my nemesis. But he's also a hunter who has a survivor counterpart called the Prospector. He's also in the same game actually as Alice and Orpheus. Another hunter's they called identity switches, by the way. So another hunter survivor identity switch is Acrobat and Hullabaloo. Hullabaloo I also mentioned. There's also Professor and Evil Reptilian. There's also Smiley Face and Weeping Clown. So I think that's a really interesting concept that they brought into the game. And I know before that there are some DBD players that really wish, like, oh, I wonder what this survivor would be like as a killer, or what if this killer would be like a survivor. Because now I've thought that about certain like characters. Like one prime example would be like the killer, the artist from Dead by Daylight. Because the artist I could see being like a survivor in another universe if the entity hadn't messed up her life. Going back to Identity 5, that's one thing I was thinking about. I wanted to mention before was that Identity 5 setting is it's not various settings. So I know some people might not like it. Identity 5 setting is really set in mostly Victorian England, a little bit Edwardian England, but mostly Victorian. I should say Victorian era. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say England, but the Victorian era. Though the manor itself, the manor where these games take place, apparently is in Scotland. So, which is interesting. But characters do come from various places. Like this one character that's from India, another character that's American, I believe. Some characters from France, Netherlands, etc. So, I think even though it's just set in one particular time period, unlike the Trade Daylight, which is kind of like vague, and because characters come from all different time periods and places, I still really like Identity 5 setting because I guess I am kind of biased because I think the Victorian era is a very interesting place. I mean, it's an interesting time